A lot of students assume that if their story is personal, emotional, or even a little bit inspiring, then that alone should be enough to carry their entire college essay. But the harsh reality is that I've seen this happen over and over again, not just a few times, but constantly. So I mean it when I say having a meaningful story isn't what makes an essay work. It's definitely part of it, but not the only thing that matters. What actually determines whether your essay lands with an admissions officer or falls completely flat is something most people never talk about. After spending hours and hours watching other people's, college essay videos, they've done a great job of covering a majority of what should be done. But I want to focus on not the content itself, but the structure. Because whenever I ask former admissions officers about what the biggest downfall of most essays were, it comes down to the repetitiveness and pretty much a clone-like copy of their formatting and syntax of their essay. So in this video, I'm going to walk you through a real one-on-one coaching session I had with a student applying to the Ivy League schools, and we're going to take a close look at what was working in his draft, what wasn't landing the way he thought it would, and the exact adjustments I made in real time to help it actually connect. You'll not only see the raw, unfiltered footage of me coaching this student through his essay, but between each of those segments, I'll break down some things down for you lesson by lesson, so you understand exactly what went wrong, why it matters, and all that stuff. We're going to cover 10 specific principles in total. It's kind of a lot. I mean, you could probably see from the link of this video, but if you pay attention to these, you'll walk away with a higher understanding of college essays compared to everybody that is out there. Lesson 1 is pattern structure is predictable and pretty much boring. When I first read through the student's draft, what stood out to me wasn't that he had nothing to say. In fact, it was quite the opposite, right? There were thoughtful ideas sprinkled throughout, ranging from his personal growth journey to his academic aspirations and his desire to make a real world impact after college. But as I keep reading, I noticed something, right? Every paragraph followed the exact same rhythm. He was setting the reader up, me in this instance, for what he was about to talk about, and then delivering exactly that in a way that was clean and structured, right? But it was completely predictable.
Activities I hope to pursue. Okay. One thing I wanted to say on this, right? I know it is a scholarship essay, and so it might not be. We're not going to be able to tailor it to a specific institution or anything, but it reads off of kind of like a step by step, right? Think about walking down a staircase. When I'm walking down the staircase of your college essay, or at least this one for the scholarship essay, I know exactly what the next step is, right? For example, especially when you give me that, when you prepare me with on the academic side, or by the end of college, right? I'm able to know what's going on right after, which can be fine. But I would want to say, if we do that for every part of the essay, it can get boring. Right. For example, right, if this was any bigger, like 350 or 250 words, for example, and say I go walk you through the process of what I'm talking about, but each time I say, hey, on the academic side, I want to do this. For soccer, I want to do this. For basketball, I think this. This pattern needs to be broken up.
Let me give you some sort of a metaphor, right? So when you walk down a set of stairs, do you think about where you're placing your foot or focusing on where the next step is? You don't. Nobody does. You just walk down the stairs. But as an essay reader, it shouldn't be that way. You should be polishing your essay in a way where they have to focus on where the next step is, so they're re-engaging into your story again and again and again. Because if it feels like I'm walking down a perfectly designed staircase, then I know what the next one would be. And while that might sound like good organization, and I would argue that it is for a lot of places like AP Lit essays, AP Lang essays, but in the context of a college essay where you're trying to keep the reader engaged, especially one that's competing for attention, like I said, that level of predictability actually becomes a liability. Our client essay followed a pattern that looks something like this. On the academic side, I hope to follow by a paragraph about the school. For soccer, I aim to follow by a paragraph about sports, and then finally at the end, by the end of college, I will ... followed by a generic future goal. Now on paper, that sounds like a reasonable way to structure ideas. It makes sense, it's organized, it's clean, right? But what it actually does is it trains the reader, me in this instance, whether consciously or not, to expect what's coming next. And once the reader falls into that pattern of expectation, they stop paying close attention because they don't have to. They already know what the next step is going to look like. There is no variation in between the lengths of the steps. They know it's all going to be the same anyways. So they're already mentally skipping ahead, and that's why essays that follow a rigid, compartmentalized structure where every paragraph announces its theme before diving in almost always failed to leave a lasting impression. There's no surprise, there's no shift in tone or anything like that. That forces the reader to re-engage. And there's certainly no moment where the reader has to stop and ask themselves, wait, where is this going? That brief disruption, that flicker of curiosity or confusion is actually a gift in most essays. It's what causes the admissions officers to lean forward to pay closer attention and to mentally reinvest in your story. Because if the essay goes the exact way they predicted it to go to, they're just gonna skim through everything because they pretty much know what's gonna happen anyways. You don't need to be confusing or chaotic. Honestly, that would be the last thing I want you to do, but you do need to break your reader's rhythm from time to time in order to hold their attention from the first word to the last. Because Common App, for example, 650 words. If it's not engaging, they're just gonna mentally check out and just skim through the entire thing. Lesson 2 kind of builds off of the initial thing that I was talking about. Pattern interrupts re-engage the reader. Now, once we'd identified that the essay was following this rigid staircase-like structure where each paragraph basically telegraphed what it was about to say before saying it, the next step was to find a way to break that pattern. And the interesting part is that in the middle of the draft, after a long string of fairly predictable paragraphs about academics, extracurriculars, and future ambitions, the students suddenly added a line that felt completely out of left field. It was something like this: and hopefully, by then, I'll have a girlfriend too. Now, on the surface, that might sound like a throwaway comment, but for me, as a reader, it was the first time of that entire essay where I actually sat up a little in my chair because it wasn't what I was expecting. It didn't follow the curated formula. It didn't feel rehearsed or polished. It wasn't the kind of thing that students usually include in a scholarship or college essay. And because of that, it snapped me back into the essay. Going back to the staircase metaphor, for that split second, I lost my footing on the staircase and had to refocus and re-engage into what he was talking about. Because when someone is reading a dozen, maybe even 100 essays in a single week, anything that forces them to re-engage even briefly dramatically increases your chances of being remembered. And the key is, this kind of pattern interruption doesn't need to be outrageous or edgy or funny. It just needs to be unexpected in a way that still feels authentic to who you are, right? It could be a sudden shift in tone. It could be a little unexpected vulnerability like what this student said. It could be a metaphor that doesn't quite fit the mold of everything else you've been saying, but whatever it is, the goal is to create a moment, even just a small one, that wakes the reader back up. Now, with all that said, as powerful as it is, the warning here, I want to really emphasize this part, is that you can't be overdoing this. Pattern interruption is powerful precisely because it's rare. If you're constantly trying to surprise a reader one after the other after every single sentence, then eventually that becomes the new pattern. And once that happens, you lose that magic. So use this technique strategically. Place it where the reader might otherwise start drifting, whether it's in the middle of the essay, in a quieter paragraph, or right after a long structured section. If you do this well, it creates a moment of surprise and real engagement other than just spamming it everywhere. Now, lesson number 3, specificity over aspiration. As we continued working through the student's draft, there was one line in particular that really stood out to me, but not in the good way. It came out toward the end of a paragraph where he was laying out some of his long-term goals, and it went something like, by the end of college, I hope to have completed multiple science projects and presented my work at conferences worldwide. Now, again, just like before, that sentence isn't bad on surface. It's not like it's a bad goal to have or it's a bad kind of future that you want to live. It's not that. It's the fact that it's completely forgettable. How many essays am I going to read that have the same big aspirational wide sweeping statements that they're going to do? Oh, I want to impact the world with computer science, or I want to help people through biology. I've heard it over and over and over again. It's the same type of statement that could appear in hundreds, if not thousands of essays, and probably does, because it relies more on aspiration than actual detail, right? And in the world of competitive college admissions, that kind of language just doesn't cut it. Saying you want to present at conferences is fine. I like that. But what kind of conferences? What type of science projects are we talking about here? Are you working on it now? Have you already started something? Or is this just a generic idea you just thought of last second because that you would think it would, sound impressive? The difference between a strong essay and a forgettable one often comes down to that single word, specificity, because the more specific you are, the more believable you become.
One thing, I guess like the last piece of advice I would say is like right here, right? Learning about engineering solutions to change the world. Again, these are big sweeping statements. This is kind of like Donald Trump saying, hey, if you vote me, I will make America great again. That sounds great. That sounds great. But anyone can say that, right? Yep. Anyone can be like, hey, if you vote for me for school president, I will make this school good. Or like, if you choose me for your college, I could change the world. Right? Like anyone could say that.
Yeah.
But we want to, if it's possible, right? If you can possibly stray away from the big sweeping statements and be more specific as to what you want to do, right? Within a certain area, whatever it is, that'll be more real and authentic compared to, I could change the world with engineering solutions, right?
Yeah.
But it doesn't hurt to have it. It's just like if there's too many of those, I'm just like, okay, is this guy like
Yeah.
for real, or is he just like bluffing, right? So hopefully that makes sense.
There's a group of Yale graduates that do college admission stuff, and a sentence that they told their students was specificity equals authenticity. And I think that's just the best way to put it, right? Without the finer details, it is not believable at all. Because why? Anyone can say those big sweeping statements. And that trust, that credibility is what allows the admissions officers and readers like me to actually buy into your vision for the future. And so instead of saying, I want to present at conferences, show us the project you're working on. Tell us how it started, what problems you're trying to solve. If you don't know the exact conference, pick one that represents the kind of audience you want to reach, right? So if you catch yourself writing sentences like, I want to make a big difference, or I hope to contribute to solving global challenges, stop right there. Please zoom in, drill down, and find the details, because vague essays might sound lofty and very aspirational and beautiful, but they don't land. Specificity, even in the smallest of moments, is what builds connection, and connection is what gets you remembered. Now, before I get to lesson number 4, I know this one is one of my longer videos, so if you've been able to watch until this far, comment the word commitment, and I'll be sure to respond to every single one of you guys. I want to make sure that all you guys are getting the stuff you need to go through this process, and most importantly, do this stuff right. All right, let's get back to it. Now, I know those AP exams are an absolute pain, so I want to show you this new platform called Stellar Learning. It's a completely free platform with no hooks attached that lets you generate unlimited practice questions for pretty much every AP exam out there, plus AIME, AMC 8, 10, 12, BMT, Harvard math competition, Stanford math competition, and even world languages like Korean, Chinese, and Japanese. So if you're serious about preparation and want a tool that actually helps you level up for literally no cost at all, go check it out. It's in the link in the description, and there's literally no reason to check it out because, you know, like I said, it's free. Now, lesson number 4, every essay is a different window into the same house. At a certain point in our conversation, the student and I started talking not just about this one essay in isolation, but about how it would fit within the broader context of his entire application. All the essays, supplemental essays, and even the activities list. Because the reality most students don't fully understand is that admissions officers aren't reading your personal statements in a vacuum. That's not the only thing that they're looking at. They're looking at your entire application, holistic applications, right? Your Common App, your supplements, your rec letters, and whether they realize or not, they're building a mental model of who you are as a person. And that's why every single piece of writing you submit is just one part of that model, one small window into the house that is your personality, your values, your background, and all that stuff. And that's exactly the metaphor I used on the call.
Say this is a house, right? And imagine a bunch of windows carved into each one, right? If I can look through this side of the can, I might be able to see you, but there might be a wall behind you. And so if I go to the other side of the building or whatever it is and see through that window, I don't see you. I see something completely different. I see your side profile, I see your rear profile, whatever it is. And that's a different perspective on you, right? And so I want you to think of all these essay prompts as a different angle of the window.
Right.
One essay could be like a why us essay, could be a window from here. A why major could be from up top. They could see the top of your head, be like, oh, I didn't know this person had that. Okay. This guy has a bald spot. Interesting. Okay. But like, it's a different perspective on who you are in different scenarios.
Right.
And so that's why we want to make sure we maximize every essay and make sure, given the prompts, we want to show the qualities that we want to show, no matter what prompt it is.
Okay. Yeah.
They hit hardworking in their personal statement, then bring up being hardworking again in a short answer. And by the third time, the reader gets it, okay? You've said it over and over again, but also they get bored. Instead, what you want to do is strategically select which version of yourself each essay is going to spotlight. You're still the same person, right? You're the same house, but you're giving them multiple ways to understand who you are, different perspectives, right? Maybe your main essay focuses on like emotional growth or family dynamics, then your why major could be more like analytical, breaking down how a certain topic genuinely lit up your intellectual curiosity, and the why us essay could be more like how you think socially, right? How you see yourself fitting into a community, contributing to it, and learning more from it. And because each one adds another view of the whole, your job as a writer is to treat every essay as if it might be the very first or even the only window they look through. And if you do it right, by the time they finish reading, they see a fully formed, cohesive portrait made up of multiple angles that all reinforce the same core values, but through different different stories, settings, and tones. And when people say, oh, your application needs to have a narrative, oh, your application needs to have a narrative, this is what they're talking about. Now, lesson number 5, prime the halo effect. This is something I just talked about a video or two ago or something like that, but this next concept is one of the most psychologically powerful forces in the entire process. And it has almost nothing to do with your stats, your test scores, or even the depth of your accomplishments. But it has everything to do with first impressions, because whether we like it or not, these AOs are not reading your application with the detached precision of a robot. They're reading it as human being because they are. They're often tired, overloaded, and rushing through dozens of files a day. Dozens, meaning 24, 36, 48, right? We're not talking just single numbers. They don't have the time or the energy to look through it, precisely. Now, if you haven't heard this term before, the halo effect is a cognitive bias. It's when our positive impression of one part of something subconsciously colors the way we view the rest of it. Let me give you a simple one, right? Imagine you walk into a bakery and the second you step through the door, the air smells like fresh cinnamon rolls, buttery croissants, hot coffee, all that good stuff. Instantly, absolutely instantly, the second you open that door, you feel like the place is amazing before you even tasted a single bite. The scent, that first sensory hit, creates a mental halo. And the same thing happens with your college application. If the very first piece the reader encounters, whether that's your personal statement, your top activity, or even your short answers, if it is emotionally resonant, sharply written, or just overall well-voiced, that early spark can cause the reader to unconsciously assume, okay, this student's pretty solid. Here's how I explain it to our student.
But this is a video that I literally just recorded today. It's called like the halo effect, right? The halo effect is just kind of like a flashy word, but pretty much we want to take advantage of confirmation bias, right?
Yeah.
So in the very beginning, in the very first essay, they get a confirmation of, okay, this student is a very driven student that one day wants to build their science projects into something big where they can actually have an impact, right? Okay, this student is aspirational. This student has the things to back them up. Great. Now, every essay and every fact after that, they're going to try to connect that back into the original kind of like perception that they have of you, right? That's the confirmation bias. And so as you go on to write these essays, I want to make sure like when you read just that essay, I want that to be good enough where they understand like, okay, I could definitely see who this kid is.
Okay.
It's difficult to do that. It was a lot of information I just said, but I think this is a good start though. I honestly think this is a good start.
So what does this actually mean for how you approach your essay? It means that your opening, especially your personal statement, is doing more than just introducing you. It's creating a tone that will ripple across the rest of your application, shaping how everything else behind it is perceived. Now, obviously, it's not some sort of cheat code where it erases major gaps or cover for a complete lack of preparation, but what it can do is significantly shift how the reader experiences your application as a whole. And in a process where admissions decisions often come down to small differences in perception, especially at the most competitive schools that we're talking about, that shift can be the thing that tips the balance in your favor. Lesson 6, sometimes you don't need to build up. Just say it. One of the most common patterns I see when students sit down to write their college essays is the tendency to gradually work their way toward the point, almost as if they feel like they have to earn the right to get specific. They'll begin with a broad, almost philosophical idea, like wanting to make a global impact through innovation or solve pressing environmental challenges, and then spend another sentence or two slowly narrowing that down, inching their way closer and closer to what they actually care about and what they want to talk about. And eventually, finally, after all that stuff, after several lines of vague buildup, they finally arrive at the concrete thing they probably should have just led with in the first place, right? This big to small structure might feel intuitive, especially if you're trying to sound thoughtful or goal-oriented, but in practice, when I'm starting to read it out, it ends up wasting space and attention. And in this student's case, that's exactly what was happening. He started his paragraph with a few generalized statements about how he hoped to make a meaningful difference through science and engineering. And while those statements weren't wrong or poorly written, they were also not doing anything that was truly memorable. Like I said, thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of students can say the exact same thing. So they felt more like placeholders, lines that could appear in hundreds of essays from other students trying to sound ambitious. So what we did was simple. We deleted the entire thing, right? We don't need all this buildup when we can just go straight to the part that actually mattered. Right? Instead of layering generalities about global challenges and the value of scientific innovation, we just had him open the paragraph by saying, in 15 years, I hope to be running, I'm not going to say the laboratory name, but some XYZ laboratory where we work on practical projects to remove nanoplastics from drinking water. This approach does two incredibly important things at the same time. First, it shows confidence. By leading with something specific, you doing so without hesitation or qualification, you signal to the reader that you already know exactly what you're about and what you need. Now, this doesn't mean you can't ever show how your specific idea connects to a bigger vision, but that connection works best when it's built on top of something grounded, not as a vague prologue that you hope will lead to clarity. So if you notice that your paragraph starts with 2 or 3 sentences of general setup before anything real actually happens, that's your cue to step back and ask, okay, what would happen if I simply remove all of that and got straight to the part that matters? What you'll usually find is that not only does the writing get tighter, it also gets more authentic, right? You save the word limit, but also you just get straight to the point. Because in the end, you don't need to circle around your goals or add extra layers of meaning to justify them. Because if the idea in itself is strong and if the execution is clear, right, then saying it directly is almost always more powerful than trying to build toward it with rhetorical flourish. Now, if you like the way I work with students with their essays, even just based on the footage that you see today, you can work with me and my team of former admissions officers to get one-on-one help like this for all your college essays, as long as our seats are available. At the time of this recording, we have just 5 11th grader seats left. So once that's filled up, we'll just call it a year and focus on our other students. Anyways, if you're interested, click that first link in the description and book a discovery call. If not, let's continue on with this video. Lesson number 7 is avoid empty buzzwords. Another area where this specific client's essay started to lose traction was in the language he used to describe his goals and values. There's a kind of vocabulary that students default to when they're trying to sound driven or polished or college ready. But instead of making the writing stronger, that language actually ends up diluting it. I'm talking about buzzwords, phrases that sound good on the surface but fall apart the moment you ask, what does that actually mean? Right? In this case, it showed up in sentences like, I hope to change the world through engineering, or I want to develop solutions that address global challenges. Now, again, in terms of intention, there's absolutely nothing wrong with wanting to make a difference or tackle large-scale issues. That's not the issue here. Those are great goals, but when the language becomes so broad, so high level, and so generic that it could be dropped into literally anyone's essay, it stops feeling like a personal statement that is for you, because it could just be written about anyone else within the same major that you're applying for. And that's where essays start to blur together in the reader's mind. Because admissions officers aren't gonna read that and be like, oh my God, these guys have just the best goals ever. This is so inspirational and aspirational. Oh my gosh, we have to take them in. That's not what's happening, right? That's not what's happening. Because anyone can say that. I could just take a weekend to just write, oh my goodness, I wanna use the skills of computer science or business or finance, whatever it is, to make a better difference in the world, right? But these large sweeping statements aren't impactful as you might think they are. So the question is, how do you avoid falling into the buzzword trap? The first step is to read your own writing with a skeptical eye. Absolutely anytime you see a phrase like global impact or social good or changing the world, whatever it is, stop and ask yourself, could someone else, someone who has nothing in common with you, say this exact same line in their essay and still make it work? If that answer is yes, then that line probably isn't doing the job it needs to do. But the second step is to push one level deeper. Instead of just saying what you value in vague terms, describe how you've already started living out those values, right? People are able to look at the past to have more accurate predictions of the future. Past success is always a good indicator for future success. And that's the same thing that we want to show here. And again, this isn't about eliminating all aspirational language. There's nothing wrong with dreaming big, right? I dream big, you dream big. Dream however you want, I don't care. But the fact is that danger comes when you start stacking buzzword after buzzword in hopes that the language alone will carry weight. Because it won't. So if you find yourself writing a sentence that sounds impressive, something with lofty phrasing or idealistic goals, take just a moment to strip it down, right? Read the sentence again, but this time without all the polished, abstract language. Remove the buzzwords, ignore the fluff, and by the end of that process, what you're left with is the core idea in itself. And I want you to ask yourself honestly, when you look at this core idea, is there anything meaningful left? Because if the heart of that sentence doesn't actually say anything specific or new, then not only does it need to be rewritten, you could probably just remove the entire thing, right? And this is something I see constantly. When you remove the surface level polish, you realize that some of these sentences are just taking up space. There are word limits for pretty much all of these essays out there. We don't have the luxury of just writing about anything and everything we want. If it's not revealing anything about you or adding emotional or intellectual depth, then there's no point in having it in there. They might be there because it sounds good, but sounding good and being good are two completely different things. Lesson number 9 kind of builds on top of what Warren Buffett talks about, but it's about simplicity proving mastery. Because the more clearly and simply you can explain something to someone, especially something technical or nuanced, the more it proves you actually understand it. Now, this came up directly in this student's essay when he tried describing the difference between microplastics and nanoplastics. His sentence was something like this: if you think microplastics are hard to remove, nanoplastics are almost impossible to remove. And while the intention is there, he wanted to highlight a specific challenge, right? But the delivery didn't communicate that depth. It just repeated the same word and made the second idea sound like a louder version of the first. Whether you're explaining a scientific concept, a leadership challenge, or an emotional realization, your goal isn't to sound like a research paper, right? If that's what they wanted, that's what they would ask you, but they don't. The goal here is to connect, and the fastest way to do that is by stripping your language down to the cleanest possible version of what you mean, not dumbing it down, but distilling it. Use a metaphor, use analogy, or whatever it might be, because if you can't explain something complicated in a way that feels effortless to the reader, that's not a sign of oversimplification. That's a sign that you're an expert of whatever it might be you're talking about. Now, finally, lesson number 10. I know this was quite a long video, but the last one is don't let the reader taste the bread separately. This might sound a little weird, but give me some time. Now, we've talked a lot in this video about clarity, structure, rhythm, and specificity, and this final lesson brings all of those ideas together in one metaphor that I've used many times before: the hamburger. Think about what happens when you bite into a really, really good burger. Think about In-N-Out, whatever it might be. You don't taste the bun first, then the meat, then the lettuce, then the bun again as 3 or 4 separate pieces. You taste the entire thing at once. The layers are distinct, yeah, but they work together. They blend into one entire experience. And that's how your college essay needs to feel. Not like separate sections glued together like intro, story, reflection, conclusion, but like one continuous, fully integrated arc. Each part should lead naturally into the next, so that even if there are shifts in tone or pace, the reader never feels like they're being jolted out of a moment.
If you can smoothen out the edges a little bit, I think this has a lot of potential. The one thing I wanted to say about kind of like the looping back thing, there's a lot of potential there as well. What I want to say though is the thing that's kind of holding me back from being like, wow, okay, I really like that, is the transition from the meat of the essay to the bread, right? Because I don't want, when you taste a hamburger, right, you don't taste the bread and then the meat and then the bread. You taste the whole thing at the same time, right? And so I shouldn't be able to tell the difference when it is transitioning, at least that hard, right? Because for example, if I am reading from this part right here: we've climbed mountains together, both literally and emotionally, and I've come to appreciate the quiet wisdom in his words. He always told me to reach higher. Now I understand why. And then suddenly, recently, my friends started jogging together, right? There's that transition from the meat to the bread. It's really noticeable. I think there's a possibility there to maybe like tie like the climbing mountains together with the shoes or something. There's a possibility there. Maybe just trying to throw some ideas in there. But the same thing kind of goes with the very beginning, right? Is it possible to put myself in someone else's shoes when we don't share the same shoe size? I like that. But then it suddenly just goes to a different thing. I think that part can be overlooked if the very end transition is very smooth.
Right. Okay.
Because the very beginning, it made me interested. I'm like, oh, okay, what is this about, right? It genuinely made me interested. And then you switch to a different thing and then start continuing on that. And I'm kind of lost in that. So I think there's some sort of like room for improvement in the very beginning here, the transition from this paragraph to this paragraph, but it isn't as bad as the very last one. If you can nail this last transition from the we've climbed mountains together to the next paragraph here, hey, this could be pretty banger. And then this last part, maybe his shoes don't quite fit, but I'm finally ready to run in them. I like that. And I guess the emotions that I'm feeling from it, it's at like a 7 out of 10. It could easily go 10 out of 10, right? Very, very close. I like what you're doing here, but the transitions could be kind of improved. But does that make sense? Like the metaphor of like kind of, I want to be able to like taste the whole thing like smoothly without having to like feel the rough transitions between the two.
Now, in this student's draft, the ending had a strong metaphor. The idea of finally being ready to run in his father's shoes, which was powerful, especially because it tied back to the beginning of the essay. But the transition into that final section felt a little abrupt. He had just finished talking about how he and his father were starting to connect again and how their conversations had deepened. Then almost out of nowhere, he shifted into a scene about jogging with friends and borrowing his dad's shoes. The content was good, The metaphor, I thought there was a lot of potential there, but the transition was a little meh, right? It felt like we went from meat straight into the bread with no sauce in between, right? It's like this hard transition that I can feel and realize while I'm reading it. And the reason why this matters so much, especially at the end of an essay, is because the ending is what lingers. Not the intro, not the middle part of it, but the absolute ending. It's the last thing they read, and it'll be the last thing they remember. And if the shift into your final lines feels disconnected or mechanically forced, it interrupts the emotional momentum that you spent the entire essay building in the first place. So the solution isn't to change your message. It's to soften that landing from the meat to the bread. Now, I know that metaphor might sound a little silly, but it's the best way to describe it, in my opinion. To weave in just enough connective tissue so that the metaphor doesn't feel like a clever idea pasted on at the end, but rather the natural and inevitable conclusion of everything that came before it. And you don't need to over-explain this part. In fact, like being just subtle here would honestly be better. Sometimes it's just one line, one sentence that bridges the emotional growth with the visual metaphor. But that one sentence can make all the difference, because when you get it right, your essay doesn't feel like introduction, body, conclusion. It feels like one unified story that I don't realize that it's jumping from an introduction body to conclusion as I'm reading it. So as you saw in lesson 5, that concept of the halo effect that I'm talking about, the idea that one powerful moment can shift how the entire application is read, it's not just theory, it's confirmation bias, and it's been proven time and time again. It's something we actively build into our students' application step by step, line by line, every single day throughout the entire process. And if the way I worked with this student resonated with you, if you liked how direct the feedback was, how we pushed for clarity, how every sentence was challenged and sharpened, you can work with me and my team of foreman admissions officers in the exact same way. So just click the first link in the description to book a discovery call and learn more about our paid college admissions consulting program. It's a 100% personalized service, and yes, you'll work with me one-on-one throughout the entire process alongside our top-tier team of counselors and editors. We'll help you plan your school list, refine your narrative, develop your essays, and guide you through every piece of the application from now until the deadline. So if you're a rising senior and you're ready to stop guessing and start working with a team that's done this hundreds of times, we got you covered. And if you really want to master the psychology behind how admissions officers read, especially that first impression effect I mentioned earlier, go watch my full video on the halo effect right here. I break it down, show you real examples, and explain how to engineer that emotional momentum on purpose in your own essay. So click right here on the screen, and I'll see you over there. All right, peace.